The wind howled through the Gray Pine Valley, carrying a bite that felt more like a warning than a winter breeze. It was December 23rd, and Angel fought against the blinding white to reach the shelter's heavy oak doors. Every year, she told herself this was just another day of service. Yet the hollow ache in her chest grew sharper as the town lit its festive trees. To the world, she was a dedicated social worker, but in her own heart she was a ghost, invisible, ordinary, and certain that love was a luxury reserved for those who didn't spend their lives picking up the pieces of others' broken dreams. She was nearly at the porch when a flicker of movement near the ancient, frost-heavy pine caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a trick of the storm, but as she drew closer, she saw a man sprawled in the drifts. He was motionless, his rugged frame nearly consumed by the snow. Angel didn't hesitate. She dropped her supplies and knelt beside him, the cold seeping through her jeans. She fumbled with her tattered wool coat, draping it over his broad shoulders as she checked for a pulse.
"Can you hear me?"
she shouted over the gale, her fingers brushing against his neck. The heat radiating from his skin startled her. He should have been frozen, yet he burned like a fever. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the snow, fingers like iron bands locking around her wrist. Angel gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs as the man shifted. Alex pushed himself up, his hood falling back to reveal features that were impossibly sharp and noble for a wanderer. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were a searing, molten gold that seemed to pierce through the blizzard and peer into the very depths of her soul. "You shouldn't be out here, little bird," he rasped, his voice a low, melodic rumble that vibrated in her chest. "The wolves are hungry tonight." In that moment, the wind died to a whisper, and for the first time in her life, Angel felt an inexplicable pull, a hum of energy that suggested her ordinary life had just collided with something ancient and royal. Inside the cramped, pine-scented halls of the Gray Pine shelter, the air was thick with the smell of damp wool and cinnamon. Angel kept a wary eye on Alex as he moved through the common room, hiding his striking features beneath his hood. Despite his rugged appearance, he didn't move like the other broken souls seeking refuge. There was a silent, predatory grace to his stride that made the floorboards seem to bow beneath him. Angel assigned him the heaviest chores, expecting him to complain, but the man who would be king accepted every task with a quiet, observant humility. As Alex hauled heavy crates of supplies and repaired broken window latches, his silver-gold eyes never truly left Angel. He watched her move between the cots, offering a kind word here and a gentle touch there, oblivious to the fact that she was being appraised by a sovereign. To Alex, this was more than just a hiding spot from the rebels. It was a revelation. He had spent his life surrounded by sycophants, yet here was a woman who saw him only as a man in need and gave him her last bit of warmth without asking for his name. The atmosphere grew heavy as night fell. While Angel directed the kitchen staff, she felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the drafty doors. She turned to find Alex standing by the back entrance, staring out into the dark tree line where the forest met the shelter's edge. The way his jaw set and his shoulders tensed suggested he wasn't just looking at the snow, but tracking something invisible to human eyes. "You're remarkably good at this," Angel noted, stepping up beside him with 2 mugs of tea. "The repairs, the heavy lifting, you don't act like someone who's used to being at the bottom of the pile." Alex took the mug, his fingers brushing hers and sending a jolt of electricity up her arm that made her locket pulse against her skin. He leaned closer, his voice a low, secret vibration. "Sometimes, little bird, a man has to lose his crown to remember why he wears it." The morning sun offered no warmth, casting long, skeletal shadows across the fresh snow surrounding the Gray Pine shelter. While the residents huddled inside, Angel stepped onto the back porch and froze. Circling the perimeter of the building were tracks. Not the paw prints of a common wolf, but massive, heavy indents in the crust of the ice that looked large enough to belong to a prehistoric beast. A shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled up her spine as she realized the tracks led directly toward the window where Alex had been standing the night before. Before she could retreat, a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. She spun around to find Alex standing behind her, his hood discarded for the first time. In the daylight, the gold in his eyes was blinding, shimmering with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. He didn't look at the tracks. His gaze was fixed on the dense tree line where the pines seemed to sway even though there was no wind. "Stay inside today, Angel," he commanded, his voice no longer a raspy plea but a sharp royal decree. The humility he had displayed over the last 24 hours was gone, replaced by a flash of alpha protectiveness that made her breath hitch. "Those tracks, they're too big to be real," she whispered, her hand instinctively flying to the locket beneath her sweater. Alex stepped off the porch, his boots crunching into the snow with a rhythm that felt like a war drum. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her cheek, momentarily breaking the freezing isolation of the mountain. "The world is much larger and more dangerous than you've been led to believe. There are those who hunt for sport and those who hunt for blood." He didn't explain further, but as he walked toward the edge of the woods, Angel noticed his shadow. In the bright winter light, it didn't look like the silhouette of a man. It stretched long and jagged, morphing into the shape of a massive, hulking wolf that seemed to snarl at the trees. Fear fought with a strange, magnetic pull in her heart, leaving her to wonder if the man she had rescued was the one being hunted, or the most dangerous hunter of them all. Christmas Eve descended on the shelter, bringing a heavy, expectant silence that even the crackling fireplace couldn't quite dispel. Angel spent the afternoon stringing popcorn and old tinsel around a moth-eaten pine in the corner, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of being watched from the woods. Alex was nearby, silently untangling a knot of vintage Christmas lights, his presence a grounding force that made the tiny room feel like a fortress. The air in the room suddenly thickened, growing charged with an electric hum as Alex reached out to help her hang a heavy ornament at the top of the tree. As his hand brushed hers, the silver locket tucked beneath her sweater began to pulse with a rhythmic golden light. The metal grew warm against her skin, vibrating in sync with her own racing heartbeat. Angel gasped, clutching the jewelry, but she didn't pull away. Alex froze, his golden eyes widening as they fixed on the glow emanating from her chest. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he hooked them under the silver chain, pulling the locket into the open. The ancient engravings on the casing, markings Angel had never been able to decipher, were now glowing with a brilliant amber radiance that mirrored the exact shade of Alex's eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a low, reverent growl that made the hair on her arms stand up. "It was my mother's," Angel whispered, her breath hitching as the mate bond began to hum between them like a physical chord. "She said it was a family heirloom from the old country, but I never knew it could do this." Alex's thumb traced the glowing sigil on the metal, and for a fleeting second his pupils bled into a predatory darkness. He looked at her not as a social worker, but as a long-lost piece of his own soul. The locket wasn't just jewelry. It was a beacon, a royal sigil of a bloodline thought to be extinct. The realization hit him with the force of a landslide. The ordinary girl he had been testing was the only woman in existence destined to sit beside him on the throne. As the moon rose over the gray pine shelter, Alex waited until Angel was occupied with the evening chores before slipping out into the biting cold. He moved with a predatory silence, his boots leaving no trace on the frozen crust as he entered the deeper woods. Hidden within a jagged ravine of ice-covered rocks, 3 massive silhouettes emerged from the shadows, dropping to one knee the moment Alex stepped into the clearing. These were his loyal generals, men who had been scouring the territory since the king had vanished into the blizzard. The Ironclaw rebels are closer than we anticipated, sire, the tallest general whispered, his voice like grinding stone. They believe you succumbed to the storm and are preparing to seize the royal packhouse by Christmas night. Alex stood tall, the humility of the shelter worker falling away to reveal the cold, hard edge of a monarch. "Let them come," he commanded, his golden eyes flaring with a dangerous light. "They think they are hunting a ghost, but they are walking into a trap of their own making." He issued his orders with a lethal precision, positioning his hidden forces to surround the shelter without alerting the humans inside. However, as he prepared to dismiss them, the image of Angel's glowing locket burned in his mind. He realized the stakes had shifted. The rebellion was no longer just about his crown, but about the woman who carried the blood of a lost royal line. "Protect the girl at all costs," he growled, his voice vibrating with a raw alpha authority that made the generals bow their heads in submission. "If a single hair on her head is harmed, the North Ridge will run red with the blood of our enemies." As he turned back toward the shelter, the distant, mournful howl of a rebel scout echoed through the pines, signaling that the countdown to the Christmas night confrontation had officially begun. The heavy silence of Christmas Eve was broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace and the distant, rhythmic thrum of the storm. Inside the shelter, the residents had retired to their cots, leaving Angel and Alex alone in the dim glow of the tree lights. The air felt thick, charged with the electric hum of the bond that had been growing since the moment their hands first touched. "You've been staring at the door all night," Angel whispered, stepping into his space. She held out a hand, a silent invitation to the dance they had almost shared earlier. "For just one night, can we forget the world outside?" Alex hesitated, the weight of his secret council and the approaching rebels pressing hard against his chest. But as he looked at her, seeing the light of the tree reflected in her eyes, the Alpha King surrendered to the man. He took her hand, his large palm engulfing hers, and pulled her close. They moved slowly, a swaying motion that felt less like a dance and more like an anchor in the rising storm. Angel rested her head against his shoulder, her glowing locket humming a steady, warm vibration against her skin. For a few precious minutes, the danger in the pines was a world away. Alex leaned down, his breath ghosting over her ear as he prepared to whisper the truth of who he was and what she meant to him. But the confession died in his throat. A long, chilling howl pierced the quiet, closer than any before, followed by the sound of splintering wood at the perimeter fence. Alex's body went rigid, his eyes flashing a predatory gold as he pushed Angel behind him. The romantic dream was over. The wolves were no longer at the door, they were coming through it. The heavy oak doors of the gray pine shelter didn't just open, they exploded inward under a force that no human could possess. The festive Christmas gala, once filled with the scent of cinnamon and the soft hum of carols, was instantly choked by the smell of wet fur and impending violence. Men in dark tactical gear flooded the room, their eyes shimmering with a feral, then yellow light that betrayed their human disguises. These were the Ironclaw rebels, and they moved with a coordinated predatory speed that left the shelter residents paralyzed with terror. "Where is he?" the lead rebel roared, his voice a distorted snarl that vibrated the very glass in the window frames. "Where is the coward king who hides among the sheep?" Angel didn't think. She didn't have time to be afraid. Driven by an ancient instinct she couldn't name, she stepped directly into the path of the lead attacker, her small frame a sharp contrast to his hulking mass. "There are only people here looking for a meal and a bed," she shouted, her voice trembling but defiant. "You have no right to be here!" Behind her, she felt Alex's presence shift. The air around him seemed to warp and heat, the electric hum of the bond turning into a deafening roar in her ears. One of the rebels lunged toward Angel, his fingers lengthening into jagged claws, aiming for the glowing locket at her throat. "The girl carries the seal!" the attacker cried. "Kill her, and the line ends!" Before the rebel could touch her, Alex moved. He didn't just step forward. He blurred. With a low, guttural growl that shook the foundations of the building, he intercepted the attacker midair, throwing him across the room with a single, effortless sweep of his arm. Angel looked back and gasped. Alex's eyes were no longer just gold. They were twin suns of molten fury, and his skin seemed to ripple with a power that was rapidly outgrowing its human container. The gala was no longer a party, it was a battlefield. And the man she had rescued was about to become the nightmare of everyone who dared to threaten her. The walls of the gray pine shelter groaned as the internal pressure of Alex's power reached its breaking point. Seeing the lead rebel's claws inches from Angel's throat, Alex realized he could no longer maintain his human charade if he wanted her to survive. With a roar that drowned out the screams of the crowd and the whistling wind, he threw his head back and the transformation began. Angel watched in terrified awe as Alex's body surged upward, his clothes tearing like parchment under the force of shifting bone and muscle. This wasn't the agonizing, bone-breaking struggle of the common shifter. This was a golden shift, a royal ascension. Fur the color of burnished sunlight erupted from his skin, and his human face elongated into the powerful, lethal visage of a beast. In a matter of seconds, a massive, golden-furred alpha wolf, standing nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, towered over the ballroom. An undeniable royal aura radiated from him, a physical weight that forced the weaker rebels to their knees in involuntary submission. The king had returned. The lead rebel tried to strike, but Alex moved with a speed that defied the laws of physics. With one thunderous snap of his jaws, he disarmed the threat, his molten gold eyes never leaving Angel's face. As the rebels realized they were facing their true monarch, the Iron Claw insurrection collapsed into a desperate scramble for the exits. Alex stepped toward Angel, his massive paws silent on the floorboards, and lowered his head. Despite his monstrous form, the gaze he leveled at her was filled with the same desperate love she had seen in the snow. He wasn't just a wolf. He was her protector, and for the first time she looked at the beast and felt entirely safe. The chaos of the invasion subsided as the remaining rebels fled into the night, leaving the shelter in a stunned, ringing silence. Alex, still in his massive golden wolf form, stood among the splintered remains of the festive gala, his presence commanding an absolute heavy stillness. He began the slow, agonizing process of shifting back into his human form, his regal features emerging from the golden fur until he stood before Angel, weary but undeniably a king. "The test is over," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the transformation. He looked at his loyal generals, who had now entered the room to secure the perimeter, and issued a command of mercy rather than execution for the captured rebels, proving that his time among the sheep had tempered his predatory soul. Turning back to Angel, Alex lowered his head, not as a predator, but as a man seeking forgiveness. He explained his deception, how he had lived as a beggar to find a mate who would love the man behind the crown and to root out those who only valued power. Angel looked at her glowing locket and then at Alex, the fear in her heart dissolving into a profound realization of her own belonging. "I didn't save a man in the snow," she realized aloud. "I saved a kingdom." Alex reached out, his thumb tracing the royal sigil on her neck, and dropped to one knee in front of the entire shelter. He wasn't just offering her a place in his world, he was offering her the throne beside him. The ordinary social worker who had given her coat to a stranger was now being recognized as the fated Luna Queen, the missing piece of the Northridge legacy. The dawn of Christmas Day broke over the Northridge with a clarity that seemed to scrub the shadows of the rebellion from the mountain. Within the walls of the royal pack house, the transition for Angel was breathtaking. She had transformed from a woman rationing soup in a drafty shelter to the fated mate of a king whose territory stretched beyond the horizon. Alex, no longer the hooded stranger she had rescued, moved through the halls with a lethal, shimmering grace that commanded the absolute submission of every shifter he passed. Yet when his gaze landed on Angel, the terrifying Alpha King vanished, replaced by the man who had shared a quiet dance with her under the flickering shelter lights. He led her to a balcony overlooking the vast pine forests, his hand lingering on the royal seal of her locket, the object that had confirmed her hidden heritage during the heat of the invasion. Alex explained that the Iron Claw threat was not just a bid for his throne, but a test of his mate's spirit. He had needed to know his queen possessed a heart that would protect the weak even when it cost her everything. As the pack gathered below for the official coronation, the bells of the small town where the shelter stood began to ring for Christmas morning. For the first time in her life, Angel didn't feel like an ordinary girl lost in the cold. She felt the hum of the fated bond, realizing that her act of mercy in the blizzard had not just saved a man but had rewritten the rules of an entire kingdom. This journey from the streets to the throne proves that true talent and nobility do not choose a cradle or social class. They simply wait for the right opportunity to shine and rewrite the rules of a world that insists on putting extraordinary people in boxes too small to contain their greatness.